our reporting cycle, and this has pushed the country's death toll to over 79,000. The National Institute for Communicable Diseases also reported 13,261 new coronavirus infections in the country. KwaZulu-Natal has the highest number of new infections at 3,884, followed by the Western Cape at 3,160. Gauteng now has 1,409 new cases. Active cases has declined to below 163,000. The recovery rate has increased to 91%. All right, on the agenda now, another sharp focus on COVID-19 vaccines. Let's bring in Professor Helen Rees, who is a member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee and the MAC Vaccine Committee advising the Minister of Health on COVID-19. Professor, as always, good to have you on the program. The Professor is also the board chair of the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
All right, let's just talk a bit about the United States Food and Drug Administration's full approval process with regards to the COVID-19 vaccines. Why is that taking so long? And I say so long, fully understanding that this process is designed for when we are not in a pandemic. But how important is it that they get that full approval from the FDA at this stage of the fight against COVID?
Well, it's probably going to be the first of many other regulators who are also probably going to move towards full approval. It's taken, we went for emergency use worldwide, all the regulators, the World Health Organization, because we wanted to accumulate more data. We wanted to accumulate more data on the effectiveness of the vaccines as we rolled them out, but we also wanted to accumulate more data on the safety. And it's important for people to understand that we get a lot of safety data from clinical trials, these great big phase 3 clinical trials, but we get more safety data when we start rolling it out in the millions, as we're now doing. Really, I think we're very encouraged in South Africa. We're rolling it out now, millions of doses. What we're looking for are there any unusual, severe, very rare adverse events that we see in that kind of coverage that we wouldn't necessarily see even if we had 440,000 people in a trial. So what's happening worldwide is that for all the vaccines, the vaccine manufacturers are incrementally giving more and more data to the drug regulatory authorities. And that means that you'll get to a point where there's sufficient data to allow you to register the product.
So what will a Pfizer approval by the FDA mean for those who receive the single-shot J&J vaccine?
Well, remember that if we're talking about the single-shot J&J vaccine, we're talking about the South African context here. So we do work closely with a range of other regulatory authorities worldwide, including the FDA. So we will be able to access some of the data and some of their analysis of the data. This is called reliance mechanisms, where regulatory authorities actually share information with each other. So that will be something that we can do. But we would also need in South Africa for the company to submit the same data to us, exactly the same data as they've submitted to the FDA. And I'm sure with time we're going to see this. Now, in terms of what does this mean for the J&J, the question that's very much on the cards and is being widely discussed, including by the vaccine MAC, the Ministerial Advisory Committee, is do we need to give either a second dose of J&J or do we need to give a booster dose with Pfizer to really enhance what is already an effective vaccine? And so that is the discussion that's ongoing. The FDA's decision on Pfizer, that won't affect our discussion in country. We're having that discussion independently and looking at all that data at the moment.
All right, understood. I got a very interesting question from a colleague from another country who asked if you could mix vaccines. Say, for instance, the colleague had an AstraZeneca shot, number one. Can they get a Pfizer shot, number two?
It's a very good question, and it's a hot topic. And in fact, we're doing research in South Africa, my own institute with the MRC and colleagues from KwaZulu-Natal and NICD. We're going to be doing a study where we're looking at this, where we're looking at what happens if you add Pfizer on top of the J&J vaccine. What sort of immune response do you get? But what we saw with the AstraZeneca vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine and the J&J are both adenovirus. These are viral vector vaccines, so they're similar platforms to each other. In the UK, they did a study where they gave an AstraZeneca vaccine and then they gave a Pfizer vaccine, and there was a very, very good immune response. In fact, better than giving 2 AstraZeneca vaccines. So I think that we're probably worldwide going to be looking more and more at this mixing of 2 different vaccines to really strengthen the immune response. And it actually matters as well which way you give it. When they gave in the UK Pfizer first and AstraZeneca second, wasn't nearly as good. So some vaccines will be very good at priming your immune system, really sort of kick-starting it. Right. And then you combine it with a different sort of vaccine, and then you get a real boost. But the order in which you do it actually matters.
Just help me understand, Professor Rees. Did scientists know from the beginning that vaccines would wear off after a certain period of time? Was there this expectation that it would decline in strength? And then throw in the Delta variant. How does that now change the calculus?
Well, remember, these are new vaccines and it's a new virus. So we didn't know. I mean, there was no way we could possibly have known how long the protection would last for. If we look at vaccines for other diseases, some will give you lifelong protection. Something like a measles vaccine will give you lifelong protection, yellow fever. But other vaccines, you have to keep boosting. If you think about the flu vaccine, we have to give a different flu vaccine every year. So it really, you have to first understand how the virus is behaving, and then how does this vaccine act against the virus, and how long will it last for? And we're still learning this at the moment. We do know that for any vaccine, when you give a vaccine, you do get antibodies produced that we can measure in the bloodstream. But over time, for any vaccine, they will decline. That's what you expect to see. But what you're hoping is that the other bit of the immune system that has what we call memory cells, that's well primed by the vaccine, so that even though you don't have lots and lots of antibodies circulating, say after 6 months, that if you're exposed to the virus, that memory part of your immune system kicks into action immediately and produces antibodies. So we're looking at both parts of the immune system, the part that produces antibodies and the part that has cells that remember what it's been exposed to. So that's ongoing work, and with that we're looking, and the world is looking at, do we have to give a booster? If we have to give a booster, how frequently? Is it every year? I don't think it will be. And that's a very, very topical discussion at the moment. Right. Your other question then about the variants was similarly, we didn't know we were going to get all these variants. And what we have seen with the emergence of what we call the variants of concern, of which there are 4 in the world at the moment, but there are many more variants out there, is that the vaccines over time are not as effective against these emerging new variants as they were against the original ancestral strain of the virus. So we hadn't anticipated that, and that's why, particularly in South Africa, there's a lot of work going on to see how effective the vaccines that we're using are against the Delta variant.
You're speaking about what the world is doing and what they're focusing on. I was listening to Dr. Anthony Fauci the other day, the US President Joe Biden's chief medical advisor, saying that over the recent weeks to months, what they have seen in the context of Delta variant, that they are seeing this diminution over time of the response. It still protects well against hospitalization and death, but the protection against infection and clinical type of disease, they are seeing this diminution. Is that your read on the situation?
Yes, it is, and that's true for Pfizer. It's true for J&J in our setting. That the Delta variant is much more resistant to the activity of both of those vaccines, and that's why we're sort of looking hard and saying, for J&J, for example, do we need to give a second J&J vaccine? There's a big study that's been conducted. We'll soon have the results of that, and that will tell us whether we do need a second dose of J&J because of this diminished effectiveness of the vaccines against the Delta variant. And similarly, Pfizer worldwide, people are also looking, Pfizer's a very effective vaccine as well, but also looking to say, with the Delta variant, do we need to give a booster? And as you mentioned, in the US, they are going to start giving boosters now. But at the moment, the World Health Organization is not recommending giving boosters until we have a lot more data available. But also because we don't want to start diverting limited vaccine supplies to give boosters when, we're still under 3% of the African region covered with vaccines. So we've got to think about vaccine supply and also how critically necessary are boosters, yes or no?
Well, I guess then the question is a booster shot the only way to get the response higher and much more durable? What's your thoughts?
Well, the first thing we have to say, and you said it very clearly, is what are we looking at here? At the moment, we're still looking to see if the vaccines are protecting us against hospitalization, severe disease, and death. And both J&J and Pfizer are still doing that and doing it very, very well. What we're seeing, though, is that the rates of infection, for example, with J&J, if we looked at just exposure and acquisition of infection, that is about just over 70%. So if we want to stop mild and moderate disease, we might need to consider with J&J giving another vaccine to sort of push that up.
Right.
You say, are there other things that we can do to boost the immune system? The other thing that we can do is just continue to try and protect ourselves from infection. So the mask wearing and the social gatherings, with large numbers of people, ventilation, that is incredibly important. Because if the vaccines are there, but no vaccine is 100% effective. If you're going to allow yourself to be highly exposed to the virus, then you are going to put yourself at risk, whether you're vaccinated or not.
Professor, what more are we learning about the term called long COVID? From what I read and hear, for months you are in pain, fatigue, you have this something called brain fog. What's the data showing?
Yes, it's something that people had started to recognize already last year. But there have been some very large studies, particularly in the UK, which have looked at the persistence of symptoms and what kind of symptoms. And in the UK, a big population-based survey suggested about 10% of people still have persistent symptoms after 12 weeks. And a lot of people would say, it's not at all uncommon. A lot of people will have symptoms, between 3 and 6 weeks after being infected, but a lot of that will resolve. But about 10% will go on after 12 weeks, and some people now are still having similar symptoms after a year. And these are a whole range of different symptoms. Fatigue is a very large one, and as you say, the brain fog. And it is something that's quite seriously affecting people's ability to concentrate, forgetfulness, but also things like anxiety, insomnia, depression. So the brain can be affected. The heart, we know, can have persistent effects with things like palpitations, shortness of breath, fatigue. That is also, people complain about muscle aches, pins and needles, skin rashes. It's a real mixture of symptoms that persist. But obviously the one that we do worry about particularly are persistent damage to the lungs, because that really does affect people's ability to do exercise, just to resume normal living.
We continue to learn more and more about the deleterious effects of COVID. Professor, we thank you very much indeed for giving us some insight. Be well.
Thank you, and stay well yourself. Thank you so much.
All right,
bye now.
That was Professor Helen Rees, member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee and the MAC Vaccine Committee, advising the Minister of Health on COVID-19. She is also the chair of the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority Board. More than